Good morning. So, so you might ask, what does quantum theory have to do with couples therapy? Good question. Well, in their book, Doing Imago Relationship in the Space Between, Dr. Harville Hendrix and his wife, Dr. Kelly Hunt, answered like this. They say, we have attempted to base imago relationship therapy as a theory and therapy of couplehood on the principles that govern the workings of the universe. Just as the model of the separate self in the practice of psychotherapy, living in a universe of separate objects with implications for suffering in therapy, was based on Newtonian physics, imago theory and therapy is a model of the self, suffering, and resolution that we are grounding in the quantum field of interconnectivity. I think the key words here are the principles that govern the universe and the idea of interconnectivity. Because think about it, psychology was born in the late 19th century when Newtonian physics was the prevailing understanding of the workings of the universe. And Newtonian physics, or classical physics, held that matter was made up of atoms which were isolated and individual. The image is, I think it was a billiard ball, that was separate entity in and of itself. If it got hit by another billiard ball, it would move in the direction and with the force of the other billiard ball. So the first law Newton's law of motion. So psychology, developing in the midst of that worldview, was influenced by the concept of the universe of separate entities and tended to see the person, the self, as similar to the billiard ball, a distinct entity in and of itself. The individual self was seen as separate, and so then the focus of psychotherapy was to figure out what was going on, the internal workings of the billiard ball, what was going on in the space within, what's going on. So, and again, classical physics continues to be a good approximation of replicating most circumstances in our physical world, but it falters in exploring activity at the atomic and subatomic levels. I think we all realize that quantum theory is looking at the atoms and below, and classical physics tends to look at what we can see. And again, for the last 150 years, obviously there's exceptions, but psychology has tended to focus on the space within, which is helpful, but just like classical physics, it doesn't answer everything. So, for example, in the 90s or in the 80s, I guess, family systems therapy came along and suggested that, wait a minute now, individuals cannot be understood in isolation from each other, but rather as a part of their family, as the family was an emotional unit. And other disciplines widen their range too, widen their focus. So, for example, an ecosystem is a geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscape, work together to form a bubble of life. They're not separate entities. And I think a more global example now is climate change, today. So then quantum theory extends this understanding of interconnectivity to the whole of reality. Everything's connected to everything. So then, for me, the shift in imago theory and therapy is a focus on the space between two individuals rather than the space within each individual. All right? I mean, again, insight, I'm not knocking insight. And insight into why I developed my billiard ball the way it is, it can be helpful. But more important, I think, is the way I interact with my partner right now in the present moment. Because the space between, think about it, it's a real energy field, isn't it? It's a microcosm of the larger macrocosm. And according to quantum physics, everything is connected to everything else, and everything is in motion. Now, how partners treat each other in that space between can heal the past because of what we know of the advances in neuroscience. Now, next week I'm going to talk about neuroplasticity, but these two go together. But if everything is connected, then neuroplasticity says that things can change. Our neural pathways are more malleable than we originally thought. We can create new neural pathways. And I'll talk more about that next week, and especially my insight into that came through Norman Doidge, the book, The Brain That Changes Itself. Anyway, so I believe now, for me as a therapist or coach, the quickest way forward for any couple is to pay more attention to the space between and protect it from any negativity, because the negativity causes disconnect. And quantum theory says we all are in connection. So in a conscious relationship, there can be no negativity in the space between. Negativity causes disconnect, and the quantum universe is all about connection. So here's an analogy that might be helpful. If you take a still pond of water, and if I throw a rock into that pond, it sends ripples out in all directions. You can't block them, right? Now, one rock's probably not going to do too much damage. 50 rocks will agitate that pond pretty good. So the same with the space between. You know, if I throw a negative into that space between, it'll affect my partner. They can't block it. And again, one negative interaction might not do too much damage. 50 will harm the relationship. Right? So my goal as a relationship coach is to help couples become more conscious of the energy field in the space between. Remember, we said family systems theory teaches us that whatever one person does in that family affects all the others. It forms them. And what we're saying now is what we do with our partner forms them as well. All right? So just something to think about. And then next week I'll look at how, for me, the advances in neuroscience help to make more sense that working with each other differently in the present can really heal the past, because we can create new neural pathways. All right? And as you create a new neural pathway, the old one probably won't disappear, but it becomes less strong, because it follows the axiom, use it or lose it. If you don't use it, then it loses some of its power, and we create new neural pathways. Again, I think it's a more optimistic view of the universe. All right? Anyway, have a great week, and we'll see you next week.